Hello, everybody. Today we are reading from Classic Myths to Read Aloud. Remember, in history, we are studying ancient Rome. And so in literature, we thought we would bring in another one of those ancient Roman myths. This one is called The Sword of Damocles. The one that we read last week, or perhaps it was 2 weeks ago, Damon and Pythias. Remember, we read that story? This one is kind of a continuation of that story. So, just like in the tale of Damon and Pythias, the tyrant Dionysus, he's the tyrant. He does not appear to be terribly cruel when we're reading through these stories, but we need to remember that history shows us that he was a ruthless killer and he was a traitor. He would sacrifice anything or anyone in order to increase his power. So although in this story it doesn't sound like he's a very bad guy, and in the last story he was a really bad guy. He killed people and he would sacrifice anything or anyone if he could get increase in power. All right. And we don't want to confuse him with Dionysus, the Greek god of wine, because you read about him last year. This is a different person. This is not a god. This is a real person, and he was not a nice person. Okay. Dionysus, the tyrant of Syracuse and the cruel king of the island of Sicily. Where did we hear about Sicily? That's right, when we were learning about ancient Rome. Ancient Rome is on the island, is near the island of Sicily, actually. Rome is actually on the peninsula. Okay. The same harsh ruler who tested the friendship of Damon and Pythias. That's where we saw him before in that story. He's a mean guy. He lived every day of his reign in fear for his life. The cruel way he treated his subjects and the terror that he inspired in the citizens of the neighboring lands made him a very hated man. And many would have slain him, and gladly, if they ever had the chance. Dionysus, however, was well aware that he was hated, and so he employed many guards to protect him. Then, too, there were many members of his court, advisors, minor officials, and nobles, who owed their positions to the king, and so did not want harm to come to him. The courtiers themselves lived in fear that the king would, for whatever reason, become displeased with them and take away their privileges, or their positions, or their land, or even take their lives. That's what kind of guy he was. And so they flattered him whenever possible, telling him how great and how wise of a king he was and how beloved he was by all of his subjects. Among the most foolish of these flatterers was a courier named Damocles, who laughed whenever the king laughed, who repeated every opinion held by the king, and who always talked about how wonderful it must be to live a carefree and happy life of a monarch. Surely there can be no greater happiness in the world, he said, than to live a life of such power and respect as does the mighty Dionysus. Now, if Dionysus had been a weak or a vain king, he might have been pleased by such empty flattery, but he was not deceived, and he knew that these compliments amounted only to the praise of a fool. Sorry. Therefore, he resolved to teach this fawning courtier a lesson he would never forget, and at the same time to provide some entertainment for the king's own grim sense of humor. That means dark. He has a really dark sense of humor. So it's the kind of humor that he laughs when people fall down the steps. That's that kind of humor. Okay, where were we? One day, after Damocles had made yet another remark about how wondrous it would be to sit upon the throne, Dionysus said to him, "Since you are so constantly praising the delights of being a king, I will give you a taste of the happiness that you find so alluring. Tomorrow I am giving a banquet that will be attended by many fine lords and princes, and I want you, my friend Damocles, to sit upon the throne in my place throughout the feast. In this way, you will know firsthand the delights of being a king. But know this, that it is my belief that at the end of the evening, you will be more eager to give up your exalted seat and become a plain subject once again. But Damocles declared more excessively than ever that, on the contrary, he would never want to leave the throne, and that he would be grief stricken to have to give up the throne, give up the happiness that would be his while he was king. And so he awaited the next day in great excitement, vainly boasting to his companions of the wonderful honor that Dionysus was about to bestow upon him, permitting him, of all people, to reign as king for a few hours. On the following day, when the time of the banquet arrived and all of the noble guests had been assembled in the great hall of the palace, Damocles, who had been clothed in the splendid royal robes for this occasion, was called upon by the king to ascend the throne. A golden crown was then placed upon his head, while all of the guests were commanded to give Damocles the same respect and honor that they would have given to Dionysus himself. Although the heavy crown made his head ache after a while, and although it was rather inconvenient to have to wait to eat until the royal tasters had sampled every dish to make certain the food had not been poisoned, Damocles still enjoyed his kingly position and found the flattery and the praise his guests directed to him to be exalted, to be extremely pleasant. Excuse me, I'm going to take a drink. Yes, he could live in this style very comfortably, thank you. Then, and quite suddenly too, he received a terrible shock and would have instantly dashed from his seat of honor had not Dionysus sternly commanded him to remain where he was. The shock that had frightened him so had come about in this way. As he tossed his head back in pure enjoyment and looked up to thank the gods for granting his every wish, he beheld in horror a sharp, double edged sword suspended above him, its point barely a foot from the center of his head, and its hilt attached to the ceiling beam only by a single long, slender hair. He realized at once that if the slender hair should break, and it seemed very likely to do, he would be instantly killed. The terror of this thought caused him to cry out to Dionysus, begging to be allowed to take a more humble seat among the guests. But the tyrant refused. "Stay where you are," the king replied with a cruel smile, greatly enjoying the discomfort of his flattering attendant. "It is true that the naked sword suspended above you may fall at any moment, but on the other hand, it may not. Nevertheless, I intend for you to sit throughout this banquet with death hanging over your head, so that you may learn how kings and others of high positions must in truth live in constant fear for their lives, for they never know, in spite of their seeming glory, when evil will befall them. It takes a brave heart indeed to smile and to appear happy under such circumstances. Does it not, good Damocles?" Appearing brave was something that Damocles was powerless to do, for he was a coward at heart, and he became so paralyzed with fear that he could not eat another morsel of food. He sat absolutely motionless, looking up as if in a trance, at the point of the sword that was hanging by the slender thread just above his skull, every moment expecting the thread to break and the sword to cleave him in two. After several hours, the banquet came to an end. The evening's guest of honor, as well as the evening's entertainment, still transfixed, still staring at the sword over his head. Then Damocles was allowed to come down from the throne. The temporary crown was removed, and the royal robes were taken from him. Never was a man more eager to give up the trappings of the high office than poor Damocles, who had learned well the lesson that boundless wealth and kingly power does not necessarily bring happiness. Though his high position had its honor and glory, it also has its dangers. Those who would rise above their fellows cannot fear the heights to which they aspire, nor can they be tempted to believe what foolish flatterers would say about them. A few more words. Today, the sword of Damocles symbolizes the insecurity or the sense of impending doom that hangs over anyone who is in a public eye or in a position of power. Shakespeare had the same idea in mind when he wrote, "Uneasy lies the head that wears the crown." It is good to recall, however, that holding of public offices was thought by the ancient Greeks, the founders of democracy, to be part of what it meant to be a citizen. Many people, therefore, wanted to hold public office, and those who did not were called private persons, or in Greek, idiots. When the Roman acquired the word and changed its forms to idiota, the term began to apply to those who were unfit to hold office. Until today, it has become strictly a term of abuse, idiot, or in some cases, those who are in office, right? One never knows. Okay, that is the Sword of Damocles. What did we learn about this Greek myth? I'm sorry, this Roman myth. Greek was last year. Well, we learned that Damocles, who was one of the king's courtiers, wow, he was a subject of the king, and he always praised the king and told him how wonderful he was and how wonderful it would be to sit in his place. And then the king actually gave him that opportunity. But the king was not a nice man and he was not a good man. Excuse me. So giving that opportunity to Damocles was not an honor at all. He was using it for his enjoyment because above Damocles's head, probably right about there, was that double-edged sword that was hanging only by a thin thread of hair, which could break at any time, and then down would come the sword, cutting him right in half. It was a very sharp and heavy sword. So let's look at our questions and see if we can answer some of these. Why did Dionysius want Damocles to see what life was like for him? Why do you think? That's right. Yes, he wanted Damocles to see that life as a king was not all roses and sweet smelling perfume, that it had its dangers as well as the benefits that it is to be a king. What would a role in the government or public office why? I'm sorry, why would a role in a government or a public office be dangerous? Even now, why would it be dangerous, do you think? You're exactly right. Some people still want to kill those who are in public office, those who hold power over them. And people in public office have their reputations destroyed for the most part. Even when there's nothing there to destroy, people will make up things about them, people attack them. Holding a public office is puts you in a position where people can attack you, can attack your character, they can attack your intentions, they can even attack your financial status. People do that all the time. So, yeah, a public office that can be a dangerous place to be. All right, let's think about this phrase. The grass is always greener on the other side. How does that apply to this story? Yeah, you're right. Damocles thought that it would be great to be king. He didn't know about any of the weeds growing in the grass. All he knew is how wonderful it was and all of the good things about being a king. He did not know about the dangers about being a king, and he did not know about all of the trials and the tribulations and the heaviness that comes with being a king. How is this story similar similar to the story of Sinbad the sailor? Remember Hindbad, what he had said about Sinbad at the very beginning of the story when Sinbad he heard Sinbad's party and he was thinking, "Oh, what did this guy do that he should deserve great wealth and blah blah blah." Remember when Hindbad was saying that? Yes, and then he found out how Sinbad came about his wealth. So the grass that was much greener on the other side, Sinbad's wealth, came with a lot of trials and a lot of danger that Hindbad did not find out about until he listened to the seven voyages of Sinbad. Yes, that's very similar. So Dionysus might be wealthy and powerful, but he does not live an enviable life. An enviable life would be one that everybody would want. So you envy him. You want his life because you think it's so wonderful, but Yeah, it really wasn't. All right. And that is our mythology for this week. I hope you guys enjoyed it. There's no notes to take, there's nothing else to do. I'm glad you enjoyed the story, and I hope you participated in the discussion. Have a great day. I'll see you next week. Bye.